All right, I'm going to need you to take out your homework or a different sheet of paper to do a warm-up on, because you're still going to do a warm-up for me today. And it's going to be one where you have to write inequalities for number lines. So I'm going to show that for you. And I'm going to have you pause the video where you're at. Sorry, I kind of put the first answer on there for you. And take a shot at each one of these problems to try and write the inequality that goes with it. So I guess since the answer's there, you can kind of see what I'm looking for. But using x in the boundary point, describe that number line. So, pause video, do this warm up somewhere on paper, homework, whatever, wherever you have space, and then make sure that you turn your homework into the 6th-hour bin up at the front of the room before the end of the day today, that hidden picture worksheet that you did on Tuesday, if you were here. All right, pause, do the warm up, turn it back on when you are ready. Okay, so the inequality that goes with that first number line, since I have an open circle on -1 there, is x is less than -1. I shaded everything less than -1, and there's no filled in dots, so there's no line underneath that less than. Okay, next one should be x is greater than or equal to -60. Everything greater than -60 is shaded. There's a closed dot there. Now, C and D are harder, but you're going to need to know how to describe C and D for today's lesson. So letter C is shaded in between these two boundary points, and you've seen this before. Remember I said start with that smaller number, put x in the middle, then put the larger number, and then you always have less than symbols. So that's what this looks like. It's -5 is less than x, which is less than 5. Notice how x is bigger than -5, but less than +5, and it's right in the middle there. So that's what that looks like. So when you have one shaded area, okay, you need one inequality to describe it, just like all of these first three. The difference, though, is that here on letter D, you've got two shaded areas, okay? And what that means is I'm going to write an inequality for the left half, and I'm going to write an inequality for the right half. I need two different inequalities for my two shaded areas, okay? And because we're writing two separate ones, it becomes like the problem in letter A and the problem in letter B. No problem, okay? So the inequality I write for the left side is x has to be less than -5, or the inequality for the right side is x is greater than 4, okay? And so I have this inequality for this side, and this inequality for this side, and we'll practice that more today, okay? Speaking of what we're doing today, I need you to take out your notebooks, your classwork notebook, and I need you to put this in your index. I think we're on page 28, and we are solving absolute value inequalities, so that should go underneath what we did on Tuesday, which was solving absolute value equations. So take a second to pause, adjust, get your classwork notebook out, and get this written down, and go ahead and press play again when you're flipped to page 28 and ready to take your notes. All right, go ahead and set your page up like this. We're going to have the objective up at the top, and that objective up at the top says, I can solve absolute value inequalities. We're going to start with 3 examples. I would just write down the first 2 because it's going to take quite a bit of space. This is a long process. And so this one I even had to flip to the next slide to have room to do. So I would just write these first 2 down, and we're going to go through them step by step, and I'm going to show you the process. So basically, we're combining what we learned on Tuesday, which was solving the absolute value equations, with what we've been doing all chapter long, which is solving inequalities. Okay, so we're going to combine both of those pieces together and solve these inequalities to get all of the answers for x that would make that true. Okay, so the first thing you are going to do for this first problem is you are going to take out that less than or equal to, and you're going to replace it with an equal sign. That's going to help us find those boundary points that go with it. Okay, so start by doing that. Now, if you were here on Tuesday, remember the next thing we talked about is if we know that the absolute value, and I'm going to write this off to the side, you don't have to, but if I know that the absolute value of something is 10, then I want to know what that something is. Well, that something can either be 10, which I can't write, or it can be -10. Okay? And so it doesn't matter what's inside this absolute value. Okay? This can be an x plus 2, it can be whatever. But I know that it either equals 10 or it equals -10. Okay? So I'm going to write 2 equations that say that. Those 2 equations are going to be x plus 2 equals 10 and x plus 2 equals -10. Okay, you can see I kind of got a little bit ahead here. Basically what we're doing is we're going to take each of those 2 equations and solve them for x. Okay, so this first one, I just subtract 2 on both sides. You've been doing this since the beginning of the year. You subtract 2 on both sides and you get x equals 8. And then we're going to do the same thing on this equation. Okay, we're going to subtract 2 on both sides, and then we get x equals negative 12. Now, this is different, okay? I'm still not done. I'm going to have to draw the number line to figure out where to shade, to figure out what my answer is. But I have 2 boundary points this time instead of 1, and we have not seen this before. So you're going to draw the number line, and you're going to put your 2 boundary points, negative 12 and 8, plus I still want you to put 0 on your number line. So 0 on this one happens to be in between my 2 boundary points, okay? If I look back at this symbol up here, it's got an equal to underneath it. So at both 8 and negative 12, I'm going to put a closed dot. Okay? And then you can see up here I'm starting to figure out which way to shade. Now, on normal number lines, your only choices are you can shade left or you can shade right. Okay? But here, your 2 choices are you can shade inside those 2 points or outside those 2 points. Just kind of like when we graphed parabolas and you could either shade inside or outside, think that same idea here. You can either shade inside or you can shade outside. Okay, so if this comes out to be true, I'm going to shade the inside because that's where 0, 0 is, or that's where 0 is. If it's false, I'm going to shade the outside. Okay, so let's see. I plugged in 0 up here into my original inequality. All I have to do is simplify this left side. So 0 plus 2, the absolute value. Well, that's just 2, and that says 2 is less than 10, less than or equal to 10. That's true. Okay, so remember what we said. If this is true, since 0 is between my 2 dots, I shade in between my 2 dots. So you're going to see me do that. And then I have to write the inequality that describes this. So think back to your warm-up. This is why I had you practice this idea, okay? So in the warm-up, when we did this, since I'm shaded only one place in between, I just have to write one inequality to describe my shading. So I start with my lower number. I start with negative 12, then x, then 8, and then I just put my less than or equal to's in between. Okay, it's going to look like this. Negative 12 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 8. Okay, that's it. That's the process. So it's kind of lengthy. It's a longer process, but that's what you have to do. Okay, let's start with this next one. So start by plugging in an equal sign instead of that greater than. The absolute value of 4x minus 3 equals 9, and then we split that up into 2 equations. 4x minus 3 equals 9, and 4x minus 3 equals negative 9. We're going to solve both of those. Okay, we solve both of those by adding 3. So I get 4x equals 12. And then you're going to divide by 4 to get x by itself. Okay, so my first boundary point is at x equals 3. Now I do that again, add 3 and divide by 4. And that gives me another boundary point at negative 1.5, which you could also write as negative 6 over 4 or negative 3 over 2. Okay, I'm going to plot both of those on my number line, negative 1.5 and 3. I have open circles, okay, on my 2 boundary points because this is just a less than, not a less than or equal to. And then you're going to see here I plugged in 0. Okay, let's take this piece by piece. 4 times 0 is just 0. Okay, 0 minus 3 gives me negative 3. And the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. So all I'm doing is simplifying this right side down to one number. Okay, this is going to come out to say 3 is greater than 9. And that is false. 3 is not greater than 9. And so what I'm going to do is, since 0 is on the inside and that's a false statement for 0, I need to shade away from 0, which this time is outside. Anytime you shade outside, you have to shade both directions outside. Okay? So I'm going to shade both to the left and to the right of my 2 boundary points. See how 0 is not shaded? That's because it was false. Okay, but I shaded over here and over here. Okay, since I have 2 shaded areas, I need 2 inequalities that describe them. And so my first inequality is x is less than negative 1.5, or x is greater than 3. So if I plug in any number less than negative 1.5 for x, it's going to be true. Or if I plug in any number less than 3, that'll be true, or greater than 3, excuse me, that'll be true. Okay, let's do one more problem. Go ahead and write that down where you've got some space. I'm hopping to the next page because I kind of ran out of space here. So I've got this problem, 2 times the absolute value of 3x minus 1 is less than or equal to 7. The first thing I do is I set it equal, and this is kind of a tougher one. So remember what we did on Tuesday. Okay, Okay, you've got to get it down so it's just the absolute value on the left side. So I start by adding 1 to get rid of that 1, and then to get rid of this 2 in the front, I have to divide by 2. Okay, I kind of got a little ahead of myself here. Okay, so start by adding 1 to get 2 times the absolute value of 3x minus 1 equals 8. Then I need to get rid of this 2. Since that's 2 times, I get rid of it by dividing by 2 on both sides. Okay, so I have the absolute value of 3x minus 1 equals 4. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that absolute value and split it up. 3x minus 1 could equal 4, or 3x minus 1 could equal negative 4. And I'm going to solve both of those. Now, both of those we solve by adding 1 and dividing by 3. So I'm going to do that for the one on the left here. So I start with 4, I add 1, I get 3x equals 5, and then I divide both sides by 3. So my first boundary point is x equals 5/3. Okay? Now, on the second one, I'm going to do the same thing. I solve that for x. So I add 1, and I get 3x equals negative 3, and then I divide by 3, and I get x equals negative 1. So these are my 2 boundary points. If you change this one to a decimal, it'd be about 1.67. So you could write it as a decimal as well, if you want. Okay, let's draw the number line, put our 2 boundary points and 0. Okay, notice how 0 is in the middle again. We're going to put some closed dots on our boundary point and then plug in 0 for x. Okay, so just take a quick pause here. So I've got 2 times 3, 2 times the absolute value of 3 times 0 minus 1 is less than 7. Now, I'm going to ignore that 7, and I'm just going to simplify the right side. So this absolute value part, if I follow order of operations, turns into a negative 1. Okay? Now, the absolute value of negative 1 is 1, and 2 times 1 minus 1 is just 1. That's true. So since that's true, we shade the side with 0, which is the inside. So let's do that. And then I have to write my inequality. So negative 1 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 5/3. So the one inequality for the one shaded area where x is in between your 2 boundary points. Okay? There's kind of a lot happening here, so let's go ahead and draw a line and write some steps down, and we'll talk through that. Okay? Step number 1 is you have to get the absolute value alone. So this is going to be the same 3 steps that we did yesterday to solve, or on Tuesday, to solve the absolute value equation. So you're going to put an equal sign in. You have to get the absolute value part alone. So like on that last one where we had to add 1 and divide by 2 to get the absolute value alone, that's what you have to do first. Once it's alone, you're going to write 2 equations, okay, where you keep the inside of your absolute value how it was, and you have 1 positive answer and 1 negative answer. Okay? You solve each one of those 2 equations, and you're going to get your 2 boundary points probably. Every once in a while you might get 1 or no boundary points. Okay, but we solve each equation to get our 2 boundary points. Go ahead and set up your number line with those 2 boundary points and 0. Plug 0 into your inequality to see if it's true or false. And then either shade the inside or the outside and write your final inequality answer. So don't forget that answer part, okay? If you need a little bit more time to write all these steps down, go ahead and pause for yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to have you do a little bit of practice. Go ahead and press play when you're ready. All right, I'm going to have you do a little bit of practice here. Oops, sorry. Okay, so a little bit of practice. So pause the video. Try to solve these 3 problems and then press play when you're ready to check. There's not going to be a lot of explanations here, just the answer. Okay? So pause, try these 3, and then come back. Alright, this first one, your 2 boundary points were 2 and negative 4/3. Okay, and this is what your number line should have looked like. When I plugged in 0, it was true, so I shaded the inside. Okay? Then your answer should look like this. Okay, I changed the second problem to have a 15 here instead of a 16. I'm sorry if you did it with a 16. If you did a 16, you probably just got 5.3 as your boundary point. That's fine. You can leave that. If you changed it to a 15, you should get a boundary point at 5, and this is what your number line should look like. 0 made it false, so we shade away from 0. Now notice this is just a linear inequality. It's not an absolute value, so there's only one boundary point. Okay, so you're going to shade away from 0, and you write x is greater than 5 as your answer. Okay, on this next one, your two boundary points were 7/2 and -9/2. That's the same thing as if you had 3.5 and -4.5. Okay, that's what that should say. 0's in between them, and 0 made it true, so this is what my number line and answer should have looked like. Okay, hopefully you're feeling all right about that. What I need you to do is either get the worksheet, the coloring worksheet from the sub, or if you already have it, pull that out. You're going to do that the rest of the time. Okay, so what I need from you is you're going to work on that coloring worksheet. And here's what I need you to do on that. Number 1, on the worksheet that has the problems, you're going to solve each problem. Okay, you're going to get an answer. And it's going to look like, it's a multiple choice, so it's going to look like one of those 4 answers. Okay, then that answer that you get is going to go with a color. So you're going to color in, like on the coloring sheet for problem 1, all the spaces that have a 1, you color it with the color that matches your answer. Okay, then go back and repeat and do the same thing with problems 2, 3, 4 until you get all the way to the end. Okay, both of these worksheets, both parts, both the problems and the coloring part, are due tomorrow. So use the rest of your time. I'm guessing you have probably at least an hour left. Use this time because it's going to take you some time. It's going to probably take you an hour or more. Okay, so use the time you have. This is due tomorrow. Okay, and then I'm expecting to see, when I see you guys tomorrow, these notes in your classwork notebook as well as the worksheet, the coloring worksheet done. Okay, I will see you guys tomorrow. I'm looking for good reviews from the sub.